Welcome back to the Scotti-BYTE channel, and this is Scott. So today we're going to install 4 of these Western Digital Red SA500 SATA drives, which are 4 terabytes each, into my QNAP TS1277 and configure them as a RAID 5 set. And in so doing, we're going to go ahead and move Virtualization Station over to it and see what kinds of performance we can get. So now we want to go ahead and head over to Storage and Snapshots. And once we get over here, we're going to say Create and create a new storage pool. And I do not want Q-tier because I don't want tiered storage. And I'm not going to enable security because I want a little bit more performance. Plus, considering it's part of a home lab, I'm not going to need that. I do a next, and I'm going to select all 4 of the drives that I have here. And then I'm doing another next. I am not going to enable pool guaranteed snapshot space because it's just going to be a static volume. I really don't need to take snapshots of it. I'll back up the VMs. I'm primarily going to use this for Virtualization Station. And I'm going to turn off the alert threshold on the actual storage pool itself. Then I'll go ahead and do a next and do a create. And what this is going to do is it's going to go ahead and create a storage pool and maximize the space in it available for my application. And my application is I'm going to dedicate these SSDs running in a RAID 5 for Virtualization Station. And I'll be backing up the VMs by exporting them. And then also the fact that it is a RAID 5 gives me a little bit higher availability in the event of a drive failure. After a short amount of time, it pops up and says that it's created storage pool 2, and we have an option to create a new volume. I'm going to go ahead and create a new volume. I'm going to create my new volume out of pre-configured space, and so that is defined as a thick volume, and that data is going to be stored in storage pool 2, which is the new storage pool. And then I'll go ahead and click Next. And then we have the volume alias. I'm going to go ahead and create a volume alias of fast SSD. And then I'm going to go ahead and set the volume capacity to max. And so this will use all the space on that particular storage pool, but I'm not worried about that because of the fact that the storage pool does not have a threshold set on it. So I'll go ahead and say OK, and it's allocated all 10.34 terabytes on that new storage pool. And I'll go ahead and click Next, and then click Finish, and it will go ahead and create that volume. And the next message that I get is it tells me that volume fast SSD is being created, and I can go ahead and close that message. So we now have storage pool 2. It's ready, but it's in the process of synchronizing. And of course, RAID synchronization will take several hours. And then fast SSD here is in the process of optimizing, which is our volume that we created that takes up the entire space of storage pool 2. So we'll go ahead and let that optimization complete on the volume, and we'll go ahead and allow for the RAID synchronization to also complete, and we'll come back later. Here it is the next morning when RAID synchronization and volume optimization has completed. You notice that storage pool 2 is out here with 10.34 terabytes, and then the effective space that fast SSD, our new volume, ended up at was 10.09 terabytes, and the volume itself has a threshold of 80%. I find this interesting because when I created the storage pool, I actively turned off the threshold on the storage pool itself, but then I also apparently turned off the threshold on the volume. And yet you can see here that it has a volume threshold marked on it. And I don't feel like I really need that because I'm going to be kind of hyper aware of what my virtual machines and potentially containers in here are using. So if I go look at actions and I say set threshold, they have an alert at that threshold. And I'm going to leave that there because I don't think it's necessarily a problem, but I might be using pretty close to 100%, so I could always come back to revisit that at a future point in time. So now I want to move Virtualization Station from Storage Pool 1 with the spinning drives over to Storage Pool 2 with the fast SSDs. So I'd previously stopped Virtualization Station, and if I open App Center here and scroll down to Virtualization Station, you'll notice that it is stopped. And I deleted, or I did not delete, I exported all 4 of the VMs that I had running. So unfortunately, one would hope that you would have an option on this pull down which would just allow you to move Virtualization Station from the one storage pool to the other, but you don't. The process is you actually have to remove Virtualization Station, as I'm doing here, and then you have to turn around and reinstall it again, presumably on the other storage pool. Now that Virtualization Station is uninstalled, I'm going to go up to All Apps and go ahead and search for Virtualization Station. And there it is. And we have the option to install. So when I choose the install option, it gives me the option of main storage, my QVR recording volume storage, or now what I want here is that fast SSD storage area. So I'll go ahead and select the fast SSD storage pool, which is pool number 2. And then Virtualization Station installs on that SSD pool. Now that Virtualization Station is installed on the new storage pool, I'll go ahead and open it up. And of course I get the typical welcome to Virtualization Station. It checks off to make sure that everything is properly set up. And I'll go ahead and do a finish. So at this point, I should be able to go ahead and import my virtual machines. So I'm going to go over and do that and come back. Now I've imported 3 of my virtual machines, VMS Cloud-Incus, which was featured on my video, Incus on QNAP, where I created a virtual machine and hosted an Incus server inside of it, Ubuntu Test, which is one of my test machines, and a Chasm server. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the VMS Cloud-Incus machine, and I'll scroll down here. And the key point when I imported these was to import them to my location that was on the SSD. So here you'll notice it says /container-SSD, virtual machines-SSD, and then VMS Cloud-Incus. So now, since the actual virtual hard disk is running from the SSD, we'll have dramatically increased performance. Let's take a closer look on what this data structure looks like, and we can do that by moving over to File Station. And when I fire up File Station, and we go down here to the location on the fast SSD, we'll see Container SSD, and inside of Container SSD I have Virtual Machines SSD. And so in here I have my virtual machines, Chasm, and then I have rather an old one, Test Pixie, which I didn't import, Ubuntu Test, and VMS Cloud-Incus. And then I just have a couple of ISOs over here as well. After seeing the increase in performance for Virtualization Station, I decided to do the same with Container Station. So on my machine, I had a folder that was actually called Container, and inside of it is where my Container Station data resided. So I shut down Container Station. Again, Container Station hosts both Docker containers and also LXD containers. So I went ahead and shut that down, and I moved the entire data structure under container over to fast SSD, and I decided to call it Container Station over here. So underneath Container SSD, I have Container Station data. If we look inside of Container Station data, we have all the folders that get created as part of the structure when you install and set up Container Station. And so the live directory is the one of interest. If we look at the live directory, you'll notice that there is a Docker folder, a lightweight Kubernetes folder, which is K3S, the LXC file system folder, and the LXD folder. And all of these support the data structure for both Docker and LXD applications. So what I did in order to move Container Station, as I mentioned earlier, was to shut Container Station down to move Container Station over to this new file structure, and then to uninstall Container Station and reinstall Container Station. Unfortunately, I did not record the section where I reinstalled Container Station, but I did the same thing that I did for Virtualization Station. And if we go look at Storage and Snapshots, inside Storage and Snapshots, if I move over to Storage and Snapshots on the left menu, and then I go ahead and expand Storage Pool 2 and highlight Fast SSD and double click it, it will go ahead and bring up this entry here. And if I scroll down, you'll notice that on Fast SSD, I have Virtualization Station installed. That means the Q package for Virtualization Station that we did earlier. But since I also uninstalled and reinstalled Container Station, you see that Container Station is also on Fast SSD, as is the QBR Face Insight that I'm testing currently. So now I'll go ahead and dismiss this screen and exit Storage and Snapshots and exit Virtualization Station, and I'll head over to Container Station. So when you first invoke Container Station after having uninstalled it and then reinstall it, the first thing it comes up with is asking you where you want to store your Container Station data. And all I simply did was to specify the folder on Fast SSD where I had moved the data that was previously installed. And when I did that, Container Station came up and all of the Docker and LXD applications were up and running. The difference is they were up and running on the SSD now. And if I go ahead and click on my containers and go look at any particular container, everything comes up really much faster, because now not only is the application running on the SSDs, but so are all the containers. Both the Docker and the LXD containers are running on the SSD. So here we are over on Lex Console, and Lex Console is a GUI application to manage both LXD and Incus containers. And you can watch my video entitled Lex Console Web Interface for Incus, and it also manages the LXD containers as well. So I also have a video out there that is very similar, and it talks about how to host Lex Console also on LXD. So there's the virtual machine, VMS Cloud-Incus, which is the Incus virtual machine, but VMS Cloud is actually looking at the container that I have for Tautuli as an example, hosted over on the QNAP NAS. So if I say create a new instance, and I simply call this instance test and make it a container, and go ahead and use the Ubuntu Jammy account, or Ubuntu Jammy image rather, and I can even select other profiles if I want, and I can set things like boot.autostart equals to true. Of course, we know in the QNAP NAS that I have to, since I'm using advanced permissions, I have to set privileged equal to true or else the container won't start. And I go ahead and do a submit. And it says creating instance test. So that instance has already been created. I can go into it and I can click start, and it says starting instance test, and now instance test is fully up and running, and it has an address on the internal NAT. So this is much, much faster than it used to be to manage containers over in Container Station. Now that we have Lex Console managing the containers, and also now that we have the containers hosted on the SSD Storage Pool. And likewise, I can stop the container. I can move back up here to instances. I can see that the container stopped, and I can delete it, and I say OK, and it says deleting instance test, and it's already gone. So this is really great performance, and I think a massive improvement on running applications in containers on QNAP NAS. So in summary, both Container Station and Virtualization Station can be moved over to an SSD from the perspective of the application program themselves. Virtualization Station virtual disk can be moved over to the SSD, and that dramatically improves the performance of each individual VM. And likewise, you can move the entire data structure of Container Station from your spinning disks over to an SSD storage pool, and that way both LXD and Docker containers run considerably faster. Anyway, that's it for today. Please subscribe and like to the channel, and don't forget to hit that notification bell, and we'll see you next time.